Okay, welcome everyone to the open source business panel. So open source has become de facto business model. I mean, earlier this week, Polars has just announced a Series A of 80 million euros. And I remember when I met Richie 3 years ago at EuroSciPy, and he just like, yeah, he started Polars, and then a VC fund approached him. So this is not always like planned. He started before. And Astral is doing a lot of stuff in the Python ecosystem. So I'm really very happy today to be joined here by Yann Lechelle and Sylvain Corlay. They have both are building their businesses on open source software. Let me start with Sylvain, because many of you know him already anyway, right? So he's a co-contributor to open source, CEO of QuantStack, and before he was a very successful consultant in the financial industry before he came to QuantStack. And then later he built QuantStack on open source as a business. And Yann does not come from open source, yes. So Yann is the CEO of Probabl. You probably know Probabl for scikit-learn and many other libraries they support. And he has deep roots in the European tech scene. So Yann actually has led high growth companies through both exits and scale-ups, including Scaleway, a European cloud provider, which has up to like 500 people. So that's a decent company. Yeah? And then with Probabl, he's championing sustainable mission-driven innovation and helping to transform trusted tools like scikit-learn into long-term business public assets. That's a new aspect here. So let's just jump right in. So yeah, please give them a warm welcome, right? Yeah, thank you. So let's start. You both had like lucrative businesses before. So what was the calling? Like, why open source? Strategy, a calling, altruism. Why did you change from being a very successful CEO to doing something with open source and basically start a new startup of Probabl?
Well, first thing, Sylvain is the real thing. I'm not from the open source community in the same way. I came to it pretty late, even though I did leverage open source in some ways before, even contributed to some degree. But with scikit-learn, for which I have absolutely no merit, this was built out of INRIA and by core developers over the course of 10 plus years, I came to the conclusion that open source was strategic for Europe in particular, but also for tech in general, as a overarching technique that is not based on altruism per se, but more about balance. And it turns out that I've been competing with big tech for the past 25 years, and I admire them in many ways. It's not the issue. The issue is that they've captured too much value in the value chain. So we've reached a point where regulation doesn't work. And therefore, the only way is to undercut their dominance by making sure that technology is widely distributed to rebalance the equation. So I came to this conclusion, and the project scikit-learn, in a way, came to me to create a hybrid new type of company that leverages this particular asset, which is open source, BSD3 license, already used by almost everyone on the planet when it comes to machine learning. So it's basically the result of my personal track record, my frustration as a tech entrepreneur in the face of big tech, with an asset that I consider patrimonial, because scikit-learn is patrimonial. The brand belongs to the research center, but the code belongs to everyone. So it's humanity's property. So we need to protect it.
Okay, great. How about you?
I wanted to second this idea of shared ownership. It's really interesting when the Linux project came to be in the 90s, how the leadership at Microsoft was presenting this as some kind of plot, like some collectivist plot to destroy capitalism. No, they really embraced open source later on, but at the time, they were really angry at this. And because, not because they did not understand it, it's because they understood it really well, because their business model back then was selling licenses. And when you give licenses that give anyone the rights to distribute your software, you completely break the model, and you need to think differently.
Because software used to be free in the very early days.
Yes.
It was basically Microsoft and IBM who changed the game to license. And
totally, and I was actually getting to that. It's that a lot of that scientific software, the roots of software are in academia, and especially for scientific computing, for science in general. I think we all have deeply rooted the idea that there would be a contradiction in trying to understand the world with tools that you don't have the right to understand. And so it's almost epistemological contradiction if you were to do that. And so everyone, even if it's not beyond the ideology of the open source movement, it's a reflex that I need to know what's going on if it's not already a commoditized bit of the stack.
Right. So now we see like the global impact, open source software. So how do you get both worlds together, like keeping release cycles? I mean, you have customers have needs. So how do you navigate that? Like a typical company would just say, hey, let's make a release plan, let's staff, if we're understaffed, get external consultants in to help. So what's the strategy in navigating open source? What's the difference? Because you see both worlds pretty well.
Well, first I'll talk about the SaaS business, software as a service. And if you look at startups and a lot of tech companies, they leverage the SaaS model, which is the preferred model for VCs, venture capitalists, because they understand it very well. And SaaS enables, lock-in. Once you have clients in the SaaS business, it creates recurring revenue. And VCs like to see that because you can build growth and you can secure the client base in many ways. Now, I've come to realize that in the open source world, there's probably as many business models as there are open source projects. And that is fascinating, and it's rich and extremely delightfully complex. It depends on the maturity of the project itself, the user base, the number of core developers, whether it's stagnant or extremely dynamic. The location, is it really centered on one geography, or is it really widespread? So all of these components make room for business models that are different in each case. In our case, we chose to create a company, but also the project itself was gifted by the willingness by the French government to finance it beyond what had been done as part of the research lab. So INRIA had been the host for scikit-learn and many of the core devs, even though core devs existed outside. But the French government, knowing that they owned the brand, so that the brand is also the way to call the community, if you wish, they wanted to invest in that. And that's wonderful because it's a rare event where a government says, oh, by the way, this technology is important, we're going to finance it. It came from them, of course, as a result of conversations. So we created a company that is hybrid. The open source asset is mature, stable, but we need to invest in maintenance. We pay for it. Next to it, we build a more traditional business model with a complementary product. And the model of inspiration for us is Red Hat in many ways. Linux on one end, but the professional value-added version paid for on the other end.
So,
there was a big difference for us because in the case of scikit-learn and Probabl, there was a deliberate idea from the beginning. Like, we want to do this and we're going to do a real thing from day one. There is going to be some money injected. And in our case, there wasn't a deliberate idea of making a company in the beginning. It started as a one-person business to fund my own work as an open source developer. And very quickly, I had too much business to handle, so we hired. And we've been discovering our business model ever since. It's become a bit more deliberate over time, so we have more artificially created the idea of, for example, sustaining the Apache Arrow project in the same way and the same economic model that we've been using for the Jupyter project. So over time, things have become a bit more strategically thought. But in our case, in the beginning, it was really, okay, so it seems that we're a real company now. We're over 10 people, and we need to figure that out and, you know, organize and
keep clients happy.
Exactly, yeah. Hand-holding and all.
And you make money. I don't.
Yeah, and we had the necessity to make money from day one, which gave us some kind of reality check many times, that you have to be a lot more pedestrian in your approach to problem solving when there isn't a big promise for money. But also, until we reached a critical size, there were some things which simply couldn't promise or do. And that is changing now with growth, but yeah.
Yeah, but for example, like now you said you've grown to 10. This also, now you have employees, but they are also now in the public. Because usually you have your employees as a company, you have them safeguarded behind your enterprise email addresses and everything. And basically a lot, or even most of the work is in public. And I know, I know this can be troublesome because people who contribute for free as volunteers have high expectations sometimes to people who get paid to be like super performant and even contribute more and better, and this can lead to a lot of tension. So how do you deal with that, with like protecting or safeguarding your employees?
Yeah, so now we are over 30 actually, so it's grown quite a bit, and you know, basically we're working in public. There are good and bad things about working in public, but for example, if you work at a train station selling tickets, there would be a really thick glass separating you from the public, just in case some crazy person throws things at the person behind the counter, right? Because if you are dealing with the public, you will be dealing with a spectrum of negative experiences. And in the case of open source development, it can be quite you know, anxiety, you know, triggering to have to make your first open source contribution and have random people come and comment on your code while you're still, you know, suffering from imposter syndrome, or you're not quite sure that this is the way to go. And so that can range from, you know, people acting in bad faith or being a bit dry in their comments to crazy ones, you know, just threatening you on GitHub and, you know. And so this really, as an employer, you have liability and responsibilities towards your employees. You have to ensure that they're safe. And so we have a bunch of tools, but yet working in an open source company is a different kind of job as to working on a closed source SaaS where the name of the person would never be displayed. So there is one side of the coin, which is you are going to be credited for your work and your name is going to be on stuff and you're going to sign the public announcement of the release. But then there is all of this other side. And
hesitant to do that? I'd rather not work. I'd rather play anonymous.
Sometimes, you know, when they got burnt and they got some scar tissue, they are a lot more cautious about being outgoing with the community. And so working with like a team of over 30 people, every year we have something happening. And most of the time, people wouldn't even notice because, you know, the problematic comments on GitHub and social media are deleted and we take action. But yet, you know, people don't have a great time. And so, yeah, that's something that we need to take into account.
Did you ever need to intervene, Yann? For example, I read Adrian just wrote a LinkedIn post about, hey, thanks, but no thanks for the AI agent contributions. They are making way more work than they are helping. So
for the bit of context also, so we're 30 people as well, but if we look at the tech team, we have about 10 people working on the strictly open source bits, of course scikit-learn, and 10 people working on the new product. So we have, it's not silos per se, but we have two teams working at different speeds. One working at the market speed to produce a product that clients will pay for, and one that is working on the longer term. We are lucky because the scikit-learn core developer team with Gaël, with Adrien that you mentioned, Olivier, Guillaume, and the rest of the team, they are very experienced. So they have scar tissue for sure. But when we bring people on board, the new people benefit from this deep experience. But the paid job is to contribute to scikit-learn and associated libraries. So it's very clear. Now, we create bridges between the two teams because the commercial product will be, there's one bit that is open source, and there's one bit that will be fully commercial, and it's a SaaS offering as well, with an on-prem system. So basically, two different speeds, but essentially the values are the same. And we know full well that for a company to pay for salaries, we need to bring in revenue. At the beginning, we raise capital because we are a leveraged company, contrary to Sylvain, who is essentially charging clients to recruit the next employee. In my case, we are 30 people. We don't generate enough revenue to pay for salaries, so we raise money, including from the French government, which initially sponsored all of this. So we've created a two-speed approach with different licenses for each. And the company is, of course, liable to protect the brand. Scikit-learn is one brand that we defend. And every aspect that derives from it. So we will protect employees from the actual workload or even the stress that comes out from this huge community of users. And in our case, we're talking about millions, right? 3+ million data scientists. In your case, what, 10 million Jupyter Notebooks users? I mean, this is huge. The pressure is humongous. Now, as companies, we have a budget to defend the interest of the people who are making it possible. So we will protect the brand. We will protect people who get harassed. The case that Adrien illustrated recently is about this unbalanced pressure that comes from generated, AI-generated contributions and pull requests. So, at some point, we will carry the burden. And we want to do this because we want to create sustainability for the model.
I think that's a very good point here, because you basically you depend on open source. Most users are users, consumers. Like it's only a fraction who actually contribute, give back in whatever of the many ways to do that. Not writing code, documentation, promoting, marketing, helping others, training. There's a whole umbrella of things you can do, or like so how you mentioned the SaaS model, you have funding from the French government, so what's your design like to build a sustainable growing business model and not just surviving, or say like a very often public funded project say, oh yeah, our budget is up, so we'll have to move on. The government probably has to save money. We see that everywhere in Europe as well. Yeah, give us a little bit more insights, like how you.
I see the whole thing as a big equation, right? So salaries need to be paid for. Okay, the company can provide for that, but it needs money. The money comes from VCs, perhaps from the French government. But the point is, if you draw the equation over time, you need to realize that there is a cost, but also a benefit. Having access to the scikit-learn community is a benefit. It's a luxury, it's a responsibility, it's many things, but if we have access to the community, then it's a marketing asset. So if we put that into the balance, typically we don't have to pay for extra marketing. Like typically a startup creating from scratch is unknown to the world. So they're gonna have to spend a lot on SEO, on advertising and all that. We don't have the same cost because of the community. So that money that we would have spent differently, we can reallocate it to protect the resources that are a marketing asset. So it's a grand equation that can be reconciled. To me, the fact that there are paid employees, that there is a company that will create value for investors, is not contradicting with the fact that there is an open source component at all. You have to reconcile it in a business model.
How about you, Sylvain? I mean, Jupyter, Jupyter 10 million users, many people. So how do you navigate open source versus business? Or is it versus, or is it with?
Yeah, so in our case, so since it's mostly through contracts, we have requests from our clients. And thankfully, I would say all of the interactions we've had were always meant in a constructive way. So it's never been like evil corp trying to push an agenda on the community. But many times, actually, it was the contrary. We had some ideas on what was really needed, and after we spoke to 3 or 4 clients, they were all asking for the same thing, which was not on our radar, and clearly a need that people had. And okay, maybe we should actually address that. So being in touch with so many clients actually gives you some market insights that you may not have by just following your intuition. Although the clients only fund what they need, and monies don't necessarily correspond to what the broader user community needs. For example, in the case of Jupyter, which is very broadly used in education, like millions of students in the world, out of these millions of users will have hundreds of thousands who will need accessibility, set up for using Jupyter. And usually it's really hard for us to find clients who want to fund accessibility work that will require a massive refactor of the user interface, right? So, because de facto they are already, if they are excluded from the user base because they can't use it, they are not going to be the ones funding, behind the request for funding new features. And so oftentimes trying to get money for accessibility, which is a community need, is much harder than the latest cool feature that a hedge fund may need in Jupyter. And so there is a tension here. There has been tension also on release cycles. This client funded that work, it's been merged, and now the release is coming in 6 months because it's a major change and it's going to be in the next major release. Or on the other side, the whole community wants to move on from an old release of Python, and we have 4 clients who are really conservative and don't want that to stop being supported, and they are pressuring us to provide support for this. And so these are natural tensions, and they are legitimate concerns, right?
So you seem to have to navigate many stakeholders and their needs. So let's move on a level. So what's the top advice you would give to to foundations, the European Union on running and supporting open source business models? And this morning I learned, Yann, you will publish a book soon, Ouvert Terris, France? Yeah, and the book will talk about how openness from open science to open source models can become an industry policy. So what's the advice? Should we all go in on open source models, and how can we convince the majority of people who still think, oh yeah, it's software, they don't have experience, policymakers hardly have experience with open source software, they just think they can hire somebody to program something, they don't know how challenging this can be and how difficult, and they think, why should we build this asset and give it away for free?
To me, it's not so much build the asset and give it away for free, it's about the balance that I talked about earlier. So my focus is about this rebalancing act. And, you all know this, but Richard Stallman had a brilliant idea, but it was a reaction to IBM and Microsoft in so many ways, because the value of software was being captured by a single company. All of the oxygen was being sucked out of the air by one company. And so he reacted. It's like, no, software has got to be available to everyone. And that idea is so powerful because it's close to science, in fact. Now, in my particular experience recently, when I talk to politicians, they say, open source, yeah, interesting, but it's esoteric. They don't quite understand it. And they throw the name open source, but they don't know what it means. They say open source to mean open weights because Gen AI is cool, but they don't understand it. So I've broadened the notion of open source, which was my actual project in the making with Probabl, but I expanded it to include everything that is open. So the term ouvertarisme in French is a word that does not exist and therefore captures the translation perhaps of openness that goes from open science that politicians understand. So it's interesting because we're here in the context of scientific Python at large, but open science they understand. But then you can go from there to open data, open source, open weights, open standards, open hardware. 7 pillars of openness in tech. Now, the term captures that as a strategy, as an industrial policy even, that companies can leverage to undercut dominant players. So my appreciation of the open source is one that is, in fact, maybe human nature, but in many ways connected to European values at heart. Renaissance, more science, less dogma. In other words, we need to re-enable the engineers in all of us. I mean, pretty much everyone here is an engineer, I suppose, but everyone in society needs to be able to lift and look under the hood, see how it works. And the software as a service model, when it's captured by single companies, is not the right model for society to control its destiny. So therefore, I'm advocating for more openness across the board, including open source, of course, which is the ultimate version of value creation in that space. But it goes from open science all the way to open hardware. And to me, that is the one thing that we need to promote without being ideological, because that doesn't go very far.
Amazing. So I think that's a great vision for the future. So we have only 3 minutes left. So looking ahead 5 years, what's the one shift or evolution you hope to see in the open source business community that would even help to thrive and grow even stronger? Less regulation. You can name anything now.
I don't want to take wild bets on the future, but I think where I'd like to go is
it's just a hope. Yeah, we won't come back in 5 years and say, Sylvain, you said that.
So, all right, in 5 years, I'd like to see this room full of people from much broader community in Paris. There is not a lot of understanding in our leadership, like here in the country, of the value of this. And the way we've been doing business at QuantStack was never to orient public policy or large companies. It was by offering something that is boringly utilitarian and that people need and perceive as getting in the way. And that's how we managed to get business, because they don't want to do it themselves, but they want it to work. It's like if you have to deal with taking out the garbage in a city, you need it to work. But it's not hype, it's not necessarily interesting, and someone who finds a cheap and interesting way of doing it for you, you are going to hire them and not think twice. So that would be my advice for people who want to start open source companies. Support projects that are really useful for many people and are in need for love and maintenance. But then I think there is a second order consequence to that. It's not just boringly utilitarian, it's immensely useful. And I think there is a lot more depth in the amount of technical work that's been presented at PyData compared to conferences that only give space for 5 or 6 superstars and that's it. And this is where the next big thing is going to come from.
I think we also have, what makes us here really special is our culture, because we don't have the superstar keynotes, we don't have the fanboy get
superstars.
Huh?
Our keynotes are superstars.
Of course,
though.
everybody is. Every keynote is superstar. Forgive me. So back to 5 years ahead. What are your thoughts, Yann?
Well, I'll concur. Of course, we need to enable everyone, and we need to enlighten everyone. So, enlightenment is about understanding and going back to how things work, right? Less dogma, more science, and it starts with science. And it's interesting that AI is actually creating this new momentum from the basis of applied math that leads to Gen AI, which captures everyone's attention because it touches us as a literary species. So let's leverage that moment to re-engage with just about everyone in society, leading to code, and of course overarching to openness at large, that is understandable and can be mastered. We haven't talked about sovereignty, but that is actually the problem here today.
Big topic.
It's
also
a
in Germany
huge topic,
now.
right?
Digital sovereignty is everything.
So it's interesting because France talks about sovereignty and is really advanced, let's say, intellectually about the topic, but does not apply it very well. Germany is less, if I may, advanced in the thinking because it was so in such a deep partnership with the US. I'll simplify it. Until
sovereignty,
until Trump.
Thinking. That's why we are such great friends, because you are always the ones to remind us, hey, revolution, sovereignty.
But it's linked. Yeah, it's linked to the military, the fact that France has a nuclear arsenal. So there's geopolitics reasons, but Germany is much more applied when it comes to open source than France, I find. So the two are meeting on November 18th, and I'm making sure that the two talk about it deeply, because that is, the power horses of the union. So we need to stick together, make it work. So in 5 years from now, I expect all 27 countries to be on board, and Germany and France take a major role in shaping this up. But of course, some countries like Estonia are amazing, but they are smaller, of course, in economic size.
I think that was the best closing we can hope for, and also on a European scale. Thank you very much for joining this panel. I think if audience has questions, you'll be around a bit. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.